Hey guys, welcome back to the podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Jesse,
I am one of your other hosts, Ben.
and yes, there are only two of us. There is no third host amongst us.
I'm
So,
just gonna keep doing that thing every time. It's gonna throw everybody off,
was
but
that was that intentional or was that
it was absolutely
accident?
intentional.
Okay, good. Just making sure. I'm like, Ben, you're sounding like a broken record here. We might need to get this fixed. So we've been doing a slight bit of rebranding. So now, welcome to the Real Stickmen podcast.
It's
That is our new name.
it's a great name.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. That was one of mine. You notice I changed the spelling in real to two e's.
We
So,
got jokes. We got jokes everywhere.
we got plenty of them, Sonny. Plenty of them. Just step right up. I'll guess your weight and give you some peanuts. See. So last time we talked about Scream.
Mhm.
And today, what we're going to be doing is it's a great classic film, had its own remake, good hit from the 80s, and pretty loved by most everyone, is Robocop.
Yes. So I again, like Scream, I don't think I had ever seen this movie. I don't know.
I think I showed you that Office clip, though.
Yeah, bits of it seemed familiar, but it was a fresh experience for me going in. Funny enough, you actually had sent me clips from the middle of the movie previously just to show me some things, and I completely
Right.
forgotten they were in there. It didn't spoil anything for me at all.
Well, that's good, though, you know? It's like, it's fresh and new each time. Like, you can enjoy a joke, like, 200 times, and it's like, oh, Jesse, what's this? It's like, aha.
My goldfish brain is good for something. That's
So RoboCop, good film. I'd seen it before, but I hadn't seen it in a while, so this was a good refresher for me. I'd seen the remake, and the first definitely is the better of the two.
okay.
For this one, it features a cast of, honestly, not a lot of people that really survived the 80s, if we're being fair here. But the main actor is Peter Weller, and he lives on mostly in the realm of cult films and nerd conventions, primarily as RoboCop. And then a film that I really enjoy, which is a cult classic, is Buckaroo Banzai. He's the main in
Yes,
that.
which you showed to me as well, and I think we should probably review someday as well. That film is not well known enough. It's got its
No,
flaws, but it's a
definitely.
charming little under the radar film. But enough
It
about
has
that.
so many elements that are bigger than the movie that was made.
Yes, yep.
Yeah, and then actually, most recently, Peter Weller was in Star Trek Into Darkness.
Really?
He was the villain in that. He was the dad of the love interest to Kirk that Khan ended up
Oh,
working for, and then yeah,
huh.
not going to go into spoilers there.
Right.
Yeah, so he had a bit of a resurgence in the late 2000s.
Okay.
Yeah, and then the other actors were Ronnie Cox, who he did a bunch of TV shows. He was in that movie with Burt Reynolds, where there are a bunch of guys canoeing down a river and then they get attacked by a bunch of hillbillies.
I've never heard of this.
Oh, it's called Deliverance. It's got that famous dueling banjo scene in it.
Oh, that. Oh, okay. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he's one of the dueling banjos.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe that should be worth checking out on our list. That's sort of a classic that disappeared as well.
Yeah, like I've heard the name and I know about the idea of there being dueling banjos. Just cultural osmosis, but I don't know much more about it. Yeah. Okay.
Well, and who's the other guy? Kurtwood Smith.
Yes.
And you know him from that 70s show, right?
Mostly from that '70s show, which is probably his longest running role. I also saw him more recently in a little show called Patriot, which I thought he was really good in.
Oh.
Yeah.
Is that a recent one?
Yeah, that was it was this decade. I don't know exactly when. We'll see.
Was that like on Amazon or
It was
something?
on Amazon. Yeah, I got 2 seasons.
Oh, okay.
Kind
good
of
for him.
spread out. I don't think it ever officially got canceled. It's just they haven't come back to it. So we'll see if it ever gets more.
Yeah, he's one of those actors that was definitely a TV actor.
Yeah, I'm kind of getting a sense of that now. Although he's I don't know why because he's good in this, but yeah,
Yeah, just maybe one of those guys who never got the break
that could
to
be.
be like he's a character actor. That's sort of his type.
Yeah, you're right. He doesn't strike me as the kind of actor that would lead even as a villain. Like he's more good in specific roles or parts, right? Maybe he couldn't carry a whole thing on his shoulders.
Yeah, well, and speaking of him and Ronnie Cox, so they're the two villains in this film. Ronnie Cox plays the corporate bigwig, and Kurtwood Smith plays the psychotic killer gangster. And I mentioned it to you, Ben, but I read that Paul Verhoeven, the director of this film, cast those two because they had played both stable, almost gentle or good father figures in various TV and shows before this. So casting them both, these people who had previously only been known as like good guys who were warm and fuzzy, and casting them both as psychotic villains was a bit of a brilliant stroke of casting because I thought they were both so perfectly suited to their roles.
Yes, they both come off excellently in this as they just chew up the scenery, each of them individually, and they get that. I think they only have the one big scene together, but it is great.
Yeah, and then the two of them are so different as villains. Like Kurtwood Smith, he's got his glasses, which you don't see enough characters in film and TV with glasses where it creates an interesting look.
Yeah, like Ronnie Cox, you had said he's more the standard evil businessman type. He's just in a suit, hair is decently done. He's older looking. He his performance is great, but visually he's we've seen that kind of look 1,000 times. But yeah, Kurtwood Smith, like I don't think I've ever seen a villain that looks quite like him, or at least one that came before him. Maybe something that came after him, but he sort of set this weird new standard. I almost feel the glasses, like he's probably not super old in this film. I don't know how old he would have been, but he's already kind of balding. He's got like this weird ascot or scarf on, this trench coat. Like it's a mixture of like completely mundane or like almost like a school teacher, like that gentle dad kind of thing, like you said, mixed with like a vigilante criminal thing. It's a weird mixture, but it's really interesting visually and makes him very unsettling. Never mind his performance, the costume is unsettling.
So the movie takes place in Detroit in the future. I don't think it labeled a date, did it?
It might have. My brain kind of glosses over stuff like that. So
yeah. But so it's Detroit in the nearish future.
Be nearish future. Yeah, it's not.
The world is
not far future. Go ahead.
Not far future. The world is still in one piece, but it is teetering on the edge. Corporations are becoming more powerful than municipal government. TV is getting more satirical and polarized, which actually we talked about. That's starting to come around now. Well, in the film it was becoming much more lowest common denominator was very clear.
Yes, yeah.
And world catastrophes are happening, and basically there's a pessimistic nature of just everything is dying in death, but in a funny way.
I just want to, the synopsis, that's pretty much it, but I want to touch briefly on that. The world is dying and everything is sort of going to crap, and the news almost doesn't sort of care. Like they're, even today's newscasts about whatever's happening in the world currently sound more serious and concerned than these guys. And I get it, the movie's got a bit of a comedic tone, there's satire elements to it for sure. But as far as an element of world building goes, it's like they've settled into this idea that everything is terrible, and that's their new normal. And they've
almost
been settled
scarier.
for a while. Yeah, it is. Yeah.
So then continuing, Robocop's main character, his name's Murphy, I think.
So
he just gets transferred to the Detroit part of the police precinct from somewhere else in Detroit, one of the lesser violent areas. And this area is brimming with crime. Kurtwood Smith and his gang of thugs are cop killers. And at the same time, there is this big corporation which has basically privatized the police force of Detroit. And they're trying to introduce this giant mech. One executive's trying to introduce this giant mech to patrol the streets, which is faulty. And if you've seen Chappie, this was first. And another executive wants to introduce this Robocop program. Murphy gets severely injured. He gets transformed into Robocop by the other executive. And basically it's a power play between these two executives over their different technologies that they're trying to introduce into the cities, at the same time as Robocop is cleaning up the streets to take down Kurtwood Smith, which ends up leading back to a bit of a conspiracy dealing with the corporation, and which ends up leading to a showdown, and he has to sort of rediscover his humanity along the way.
Yeah.
I think that pretty much covers it.
I think so. Pretty good.
Fantastic.
Before we get too much farther, we're just going to mention that there will be, and potentially has already been, some spoilers for the film. Just to warn you guys, if you want to go in completely fresh, maybe listen to this after you've watched it. But again, through just cultural osmosis, I knew most of the story beats going into this. It didn't diminish my enjoyment of this at all. This film is, so much of it is how it's done. Like the Peter Weller, even if I had problems with him as a cop, he's great as Robocop, as the robot. The camera work is great, the jokes and things. You're gonna enjoy this even if you know what's gonna happen next. There's no big lore dump at the start of this movie. They open up with okay, what is the actual opening scene?
So we're zooming through the city and we see the title of Robocop, and then immediately we're taken to the news broadcasters, I think.
Right. So it opens on those satirical news broadcasts that really set the tone of how the world exists now. And then is the second scene in the cops in the precinct, or is it in the boardroom with the executives?
It's one of those two.
Okay.
It's one of those two. And so the order doesn't matter too much because we intercut between those, right?
Right, that's true. They're kind of the main two locations for quite a while. But yeah, the when we're in the precinct, like there's a ton of cops there. They're all wearing like full on body armor, and everything's a little dingy looking. There's what we mentioned specifically. There's chatter just overheard in the opening minutes of the film about a cop who got shot.
It's in the news broadcast at the beginning.
Okay, yeah.
It's in chatter amongst the cops at the cop station, and it's also in chatter at the boardroom.
Is it in the boardroom too? Oh yeah, it is.
I think it's briefly in the boardroom. So they're talking about this police officer who is in this crazy shooting by Kurtwood Smith, and as we're getting all of this exposition and understanding from the newscast, from the boardroom, and we're being introduced to the world, we have this overarching thing sort of in the corner of this cop who's barely holding on in the hospital.
And it's all just, you're learning about, as you're exploring the world, they're not sitting there telling you this, there's an explicit scene of them, with the cop in the hospital or something, it's, I guess they do have the scene where the police chief comes by and takes the cop, spoilers, the cop dies. He takes
it's in the first 5 minutes. It's okay.
He takes his name off off his locker in the precinct locker room, so you do kind of get right down to the point. But yeah, not only it's telling you how dangerous Kurtwood Smith and the city at large is, it's telling you how dangerous it is out there for the cops, and with their experiences, because they're all sort of taking it in stride. They're all, I don't want to say joking, but it almost feels like there's a strangely, darkly jovial tone when they're talking about how bad it is out there for them. But it's
But they're also like minutes away from striking too.
Yeah, that's true. They're because on the other hand, like I said, it's darkly comedic. They don't want to die.
No, and that's taking that cop story, like it sets the stakes for our main characters right off the bat.
Yeah, they almost don't need to explain anything else. We know that it's dangerous for the cops and therefore for the average citizen, and that's all we needed to know.
And the bit of silent storytelling where the sergeant comes in and we see the locker of the cop who just died, and he pulls the name tag off of it, and something that we've subtly been building to suddenly hits the entire room, and all the cops are silent amidst all the joviality.
Yeah,
and the stakes get reintroduced.
Yes, yeah, it hits really hard for a moment there,
and then we know that's what Murphy is in for.
Yep,
because he's introduced in the same scene.
Yeah,
and then we have foreshadowing where we see his name tag in a very similar way to the name tag of the cop that just died.
Thank you for pointing that out. That was interesting because he literally dies that same day and then gets turned into Robocop. Yeah.
Visual cues. Yeah, something you mentioned was very interesting was when they're bringing Robocop online. It's a first-person perspective, and people are talking to the camera and snapping at him and testing out his functions. You said something about that was very modern.
Yeah, just they use the pen, and they specifically like blink the pen white in RoboCop's first person vision, to get him to track where it's going, to kind of set his movement, his head swiveling movement or something, which is just such a spot on idea of like how you would track like a motion tracking camera these days. You know, it feels like I've seen that in an app like this
Ben
year.
does IT.
Yeah, but it's like I probably set this up on a video game console or something. Like this is an idea that's in our everyday lives now, and maybe that's been the standard for like motion tracking cameras for years. But it was interesting to see that concept of like the tracking the pen and like setting audio levels. They're talking at him and like measuring the levels. To see that in a movie from 1987, it's yeah, it's kind of clunky that the font that they have in his little like first person UI it looks very 80s, but all the concepts are like felt like they were ahead of their time for that kind of stuff.
And that actually reminded me, that's kind of like the opening section of the first Halo game.
Yeah,
where you play as Master Chief, you look around testing out the thumbsticks.
That's exactly it. Yeah.
Yeah. Which I'm definitely betting they took some inspiration from Robocop for his character.
I would be surprised if they didn't.
So, what was one of the other points that you wanted to talk about there? So, camera work for this film.
Yeah.
It's something very interesting for a movie back in the 80s. So, like, this is going to be turning on more of our filmmaker nerd heads right here. But, like, Paul Verhoeven, he doesn't use, like, right angles. Everything's always on like a diagonal or offset or something like that. Like when he looks at the boardroom, it's from a corner, not from a wall.
Yeah.
That you see everybody. And lots of angles coming from above. So we look down upon the characters or we look up at them from the ground.
Lots of high and low angles. Nothing is ever dead on. There's no symmetry in most of the shots.
Which is weird. Like, I remember watching Terminator 2 recently with you in theaters, and it looked a lot smaller on the big screen than I remembered because it was a movie from its time, but it wasn't like a big Marvel blockbuster where everything is huge in CGI. It was real locations.
Yeah.
So it was subsequently smaller visually. And this one, you could almost see that as well. It was smaller visually, but the way they shot all the angles, I thought made it so it was harder to see the size of the rooms weren't huge. Or gave a visual, interesting style to it.
That could be, but I don't think they're masking it so much as they're going for a more personal tone.
Well, yeah. I didn't mean masking, but I meant that was one of the good things about it.
Yeah, I agree. Then that
was that I got from it.
Yeah.
Is there almost more of a feeling element to this movie? Like, a distinction that I'm sort of starting to make between movies is when they're very cerebral and when they're very emotive.
Okay.
And that's the thing. And I think movies primarily live in the realm of emotive.
Primarily, I think, yeah.
Yeah, I think that can be mostly our greatest strength of what we can get from movies is on an emotive level, kind of like theater. And I think books are more on the intellectual. And certain filmmakers lean towards one way or another, I think. So like David Lynch is emotive, Werner Herzog emotive. I would say Fincher. It's David, right?
Yep, David Fincher.
David Fincher, he's very intellectual. He has very, very precise angles and everything is like set to millimeters of precision. Would you say, interestingly, like the way that this guy directs, it's also a lot more like Hitchcock, Paul Verhoeven. Hitchcock used angles like this all the time in his films.
Okay.
Would you say it has more of an emotive quality to it?
Yes. Don't get me wrong. He's an excellent filmmaker. I'm sure he's planned out where all the shots will be, but they don't feel calculated like a Fincher film. Because of some of the strange angles they're on. I think this is all about emotion, or more about emotion than intellectual.
Something interesting that I saw, which I mention to you is there's a similar story beat structure midway through the film when Robocop first appears, where he goes about doing random tasks in the city saving citizens.
Okay. Oh yes, yeah, you did
And
mention this. Yeah.
yeah, and in the Superman movie with Christopher Reeve from '78, there's a similar sequence when Superman first appears. So if you follow with me, I mean, you haven't seen that movie in a very long time. But when he first becomes Superman, he flies out of the Fortress of Solitude in his cape. And Robocop, when he first becomes Robocop, he walks out of the police precinct. And then he's driving around the city, his main theme's playing. And then we go to a random jewel thief climbing a skyscraper in Superman, and then Superman's standing there and stops him. And then we go to some bank robbers who just rob this thing, get onto a boat, and then Superman's there and stops them. And then an airplane engine blows out on a plane, and then Superman shows up there. Likewise, Robocop, he sees two guys trying to rape this woman. He beats them up and takes care of them. And then there was also another sequence or two where he's driving around the city and he basically moves in on somebody and stops them. And so it was sort of a similar introduction to the character, which has superhero elements to it, to this world, which is chaos. And both movies don't have a superpowered villain in them
Okay.
to combat him. So it's like this massive hero has been dropped into this world, and now the world is adjusting to his presence.
Because the main character drives for them are not these heroic actions they're performing right now. This is almost like their day job.
Yeah, it's
And
the prelude of who they are and this new identity of who this person is.
So it's sort of more character and world building through these montages. Okay.
Yeah, totally. It's just an interesting thing, a parallel of the same part of the same story structure that I just thought was worth pointing out.
Yeah.
What were some of the things that you got out of this film? Because I've seen it. This was the second time I've seen
Okay.
it, and this was your first time, and you had expectations going into it, and you let's talk about a bit about your first time experience watching this movie.
Okay. Well, one thing I really took away from it early on was these mustache twirling villains. That's they're. It almost felt to me like there was three antagonists to begin with, although arguably one of them is anti-hero is not really the right word. So there's Ronnie Cox's character. I don't remember the character he played.
Dave?
I'm not going to make any calls
it
on
Dave?
that. He is he's like a vice president or like a very senior executive in the company that now has control over the police force and is trying to outfit them with all this modern weapon technology. So he's very much, the corporate evil businessman. Then we have Kurtwood Smith's character. Oh, I don't remember his name, but it was really good.
Oh yeah. Oh.
So that won't be spoiled for you.
You
have to learn that the first time.
We'll come back to that. Yeah. If you don't know who Kurtwood Smith is, then you're good.
And he was the cop killer with the strange outfit and the awesome performance. He's just like a straight up crazy criminal, and that's always fun. But then it was his third character, played by Miguel Ferrer. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing his last name correctly. And he's sort of a hero. He's the guy who wants to build the Robocop program, which is arguably seen as, when we see the ultimate effects of the Robocop program versus the big mech the other guy's trying to build, seen as mildly more humanitarian, better for the people. But there's still very evil things about it. Like they're kind of reusing.
It's still very corporate. It's still very selfish because he's using it for advancement.
Yeah, despite how much better it might be than the other program, he's not doing it for any altruistic reasons. And we see little elements of like him speaking to the press here and there about how good it is. But as soon as he's in a locked room, like it's just a money making scheme for him. He's going to climb the ladder with this thing. So arguably he's the one who brings RoboCop into the world and allows him to eventually root out this other corruption and things in the story. But he's doing it for completely selfish and highly unethical reasons. So yeah, he almost felt to me like another villain, but not quite. So it gave me these interesting shades of gray in all the villainous plans. And the villains outside of Kurtwood Smith, I guess, never quite felt like they were big evil caricatures, but they felt like they could be real people. Like these people probably do exist in modern organizations all over the place. Yeah, they're I guess it boiled down to complete disregard for human life that they all had. That Miguel Ferrer and Ronnie Cox's characters had. They were more concerned about the money they were going to make, the power they're going to obtain, and their competition with each other and their two competing programs for the militarization of the police. They didn't care at all about what the actual outcomes really were of the if they were doing any good in the world.
Anything else that really grabbed you about the movie first go, or impressions? Like when I first watched it, I thought it took too long for Murphy to be revealed when he regained his own personality.
Yeah. I don't actually know how I feel about that storyline at all. It almost feels superfluous to the film. Like, I know that part of our synopsis and probably the tagline on the back of the bloody box is like, he'll have to regain his humanity or something like that. But it sort of happens and it sort of doesn't. And I think it's in there just the right amount. It humanizes him a little bit. I think it's okay for him just to be a robot for a while. Because was what the program was designed as. So from a realism perspective, working as intended for a bit. And I think it didn't need to have any more going on either. Like they specifically mentioned that his wife and child left the city after his previous life ended, and he was turned into the Robocop. They didn't even know he was turned into Robocop. And then that's just sort of dropped. That's just like the old guy that I used to be, Murphy, had this wife and kids, but Murphy is gone. Whoever's in there now is not necessarily Murphy. He's trying ultimately to be a little more human, maybe, but he's not specifically trying to become his old self, I don't think. And I think it works better that way.
Maybe if I got more notes of that, because I was expecting him to come back to who he was, and part maybe when I first watched it, because I was so caught up in the tragedy of him dying.
Right.
But if you look at Robocop as more of a separate entity with elements of Murphy, then it becomes a new character.
Yeah, actually, that's a really interesting point to make. Because, maybe previously I would have thought the same thing. That, why is he not trying to become his old self? Or why is that no more focused on... that's the expected path for this to take. But I think it's kind of brave of them and much more interesting to just focus on him regaining humanity in the general sense than trying to uncover the breadcrumbs of his old life. And it allows him to focus more on this there's a bit of a revenge tale as well as like an actual cleaning up the streets kind of tale. Those get focused on as opposed to this mysterious wife and child. They're literally just there for background. They're not the story, and that's okay. They can focus on the actual story of the corporate corruption and what it means to have these cops that are basically brought back to life as robots. It's
Yeah, maybe for me then, I would have him forge more of a new identity as Robocop.
That could be interesting, yeah. But that basically covers all the elements of the story that the movie that I found like super unique or interesting. There's fun stuff in there, like the big mech robot. The other alternative is that he's all done in stop motion for most scenes. That's a lot of fun. Although I will admit, it does look horribly dated.
Yes.
Yeah, and all the little like I said, the first person views from Robocop, the UI elements, the user interface elements, as we would call them in the tech world, are just kind of neat. They're a little cheesy looking, but they're also kind of spot on. So yeah.
Even with the giant spike that he plugs into the computer.
Okay, that threw me for a loop. He literally just like shoots this big spike out of his fist and shoves it into a computer terminal, like almost like a USB stick style. Like a cable I would have got if it had been like multiple prongs or something, but never in the history of their technology has it just been like a literal spike like you'd see on like a I don't know, like a post-apocalyptic gothic outfit. Like,
well, maybe we need to get on that. Maybe more tech nerds should have their USB sticks that they can also act as shivs in case they get in a bad situation when they're restarting out.
And it's interesting because it is a shiv, because he stabs Kurtwood Smith's character with it at the end. It just, oh boy, yeah, dual purpose, yeah.
Yeah, there you go. So I definitely enjoyed it more the second time watching.
Okay.
It. it was a professional film, and it was a fun film the first time anyway. But being a little bit more hopeful when I was younger, I didn't like the bleakness of it. Now the bleakness of it is just part of this fun to look at and fun to be a part of world. Because if it wasn't for the satirical elements, like the ads showing the car and
the
the
nuclear
TV show
board
and the
game-
nuclear
board
bomb
game,
board
yeah.
game. Yeah,
Oh.
I'd buy that for $1. And all just the really great quotes. Like, I love that the characters they have this TV show with some crotchety old man who's being an absolute perv with these babes and throwing pies at them and stuff. And then his catchphrase is, I bet that I'd buy that for $1. And people are just watching this at random times throughout the movie. And then one of the bad guys just uses that line as they're going along at some point. It is to agree with him. It's like, yeah, man, I'd buy that for $1.
But you were saying that without those satirical elements, or
Yeah, there wouldn't be nearly so much joy or enjoyment in the film.
okay,
And I think those help buoy it up to make it fun. It didn't seem like anything was wasted in this film.
yeah,
Watching it,
it's incredibly tight. Yeah,
Scream was much the same way, actually.
yeah,
Very very tight filmmaking, which I think is a really a thing to really be appreciated.
well, yeah. So no, I greatly enjoyed RoboCop. I'm glad you showed this to me.
Oh, I'm glad.
Yeah, very. Say it again, broken record. Very tightly made film. Great environmental storytelling. Yeah, lots of fun little action bits.
Well cast, I thought.
Yeah, very well cast. Awesome villains.
Oh, the use of the musical theme as well.
Yeah, again, more of an old-fashioned sort of thing, but it's nice to see that heroic theme kind of keep coming through and be used appropriately, I think.
Yeah, it would reinforce certain moments.
Yeah.
A lot of these films would have like a tragic theme and then a heroic theme. And then the use of the two, the tragic theme would also be the emotional theme. The use of the two back and forth would really reinforce feelings with a certain amount of repetition.
All right.
Yeah.
Well,
That was a fun time.
yeah, I want to thank everybody here for listening into another episode of the Real Stickmen podcast.
Woohoo! 2 episodes down. We should be sticking with this name, so
Yeah.
you won't be confused in the future.
Yeah. I don't have a specific outro here. Did you have a specific outro?
Oh, I had
got one?
I had
Oh,
one.
okay.
Let me try and remember it. It was a movie quote too.
Okay.
And that's the way the cookie crumbles.